Sarah Martinez walked into the corporate boardroom with her head held high, despite the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. At 28, she was one of the youngest senior analysts at Financial Solutions, a prestigious consulting firm in downtown Seattle. But it wasn't her age that drew stares and hushed comments from her colleagues. It was the intricate tattoo that covered her left forearm. The detailed artwork depicted a military scene with fallen soldiers, dog tags, and a single poppy flower at the center. Most people saw it as unprofessional body art that had no place in the corporate world. Sarah had heard the comments countless times before. "How did someone like her even get hired here?" whispered Jennifer from accounting as Sarah passed by the break room. "I heard she got the job through some diversity program," replied Mark from sales, not bothering to lower his voice. "Certainly wasn't her qualifications." Sarah pretended not to hear them, just as she had learned to ignore similar remarks over the past 2 years. She pulled down her sleeve slightly, a habit she had developed whenever the comments became too much to bear. But today was different. Today was the annual company presentation where all departments would showcase their work to potential investors and military contractors. As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself in the elevator with 3 senior executives. They were discussing the upcoming presentation when one of them noticed her tattoo peeking out from beneath her blazer. "That's quite the artwork you have there," said Richard, the company's vice president, his tone dripping with disapproval. "I hope you plan to keep that covered during the presentation. We have some very important military officials coming today." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure it's not visible." "Good," Richard continued, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort. "We can't have our clients thinking we hire just anyone off the street. Image is everything in this business." The other executives chuckled, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had worked tirelessly for 2 years, consistently delivering exceptional results and earning praise for her analytical skills. Yet all they seemed to see was her tattoo. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah hurried to her desk and immediately pulled on a cardigan over her blazer, ensuring every inch of her tattoo was hidden. Her colleague, David, noticed her distress. "You okay, Sarah? You look upset." Sarah forced a smile. "I'm fine, just nervous about the presentation." David had been one of the few colleagues who treated her fairly from the beginning. He knew about the constant judgment she faced and had often defended her work when others questioned her capabilities. "Don't let them get to you," he said quietly. "Your analysis of the military logistics project is brilliant. Everyone knows it, even if they won't admit it." Sarah nodded gratefully, but the damage was already done. The comments from the elevator replayed in her mind as she reviewed her presentation materials one final time. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that several high-ranking military officials would be in attendance, including some Navy personnel who were considering a major contract with the firm. As the afternoon approached, the office buzzed with activity. The presentation room was set up with elaborate displays, and catering staff arranged refreshments for the distinguished guests. Sarah watched from her desk as executives straightened their ties and smoothed their hair, everyone wanting to make the best impression possible. "Sarah, you're presenting the logistics analysis in 30 minutes, announced Richard's assistant. "Make sure you're ready." Sarah gathered her materials and headed to the presentation room. As she entered, she saw that the guests had already begun arriving. Military officials in crisp uniforms mingled with company executives, their conversations focused on potential partnerships and contracts. She took her place at the side of the room, waiting for her turn to present. Her heart raced as she watched the other presenters deliver their reports. Each one was met with polite applause and interested questions from the military officials. During a brief break between presentations, Sarah overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "I still can't believe they're letting her present to these people," Richard was saying to another executive. "What will they think when they see someone like her representing our company?" "At least she covered up that ridiculous tattoo," replied the other man. "Though I suppose we can't hide everything about her background." Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched her presentation folder. She knew they were talking about her, and their words cut deep. For a moment, she considered excusing herself and letting someone else deliver her analysis. But then she thought about all the hours she had put into this research, all the late nights and weekends spent perfecting every detail. Ladies and, the moderator announced, our next presenter is Sarah Martinez, who will be discussing our comprehensive analysis of military logistics optimization. Sarah walked to the front of the room, her legs feeling unsteady. The military officials looked at her expectantly, while her colleagues watched with barely concealed skepticism. She could feel dozens of eyes on her as she set up her presentation materials. Good afternoon, she began, her voice stronger than she felt. Today I'll be presenting our findings on how modern military logistics can be streamlined through advanced data analysis and predictive modeling. As she began her presentation, Sarah felt her confidence slowly returning. This was her area of expertise, and she knew her material inside and out. She had spent countless hours researching military supply chains, studying deployment patterns, and analyzing efficiency metrics. The room fell silent as she delved into the technical details, her passion for the subject evident in every word. She explained complex logistics concepts with clarity and precision, backing up every claim with solid data and real-world examples. But even as she spoke, Sarah could feel the weight of judgment from some of her colleagues. She knew that no matter how well she performed, there would always be those who saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their polished corporate world. What she didn't notice was that one particular military official had been paying very close attention to her every word. Commander James Harrison of the Navy SEALs sat in the back row, his eyes focused intently on the young woman delivering the presentation. As Sarah continued her analysis, discussing the importance of rapid deployment and supply chain resilience in military operations, Commander Harrison found himself impressed by her depth of knowledge. But it was something else that had caught his attention, something that would soon change everything for Sarah Martinez. The presentation was going well, better than Sarah had dared to hope. The military officials were asking thoughtful questions, and her answers demonstrated her thorough understanding of the subject matter. For the first time in months, she felt like she was being judged on her abilities rather than her appearance. But she had no idea that the most significant moment of her career was about to unfold, and it would center around the very thing that had caused her so much pain and embarrassment. The tattoo that her colleagues ridiculed and her superiors wanted hidden was about to reveal a truth that would leave everyone in the room speechless. As Sarah neared the end of her presentation, she felt a sense of relief washing over her. The military officials had been engaged throughout, asking intelligent questions that showed they understood and appreciated her analysis. Even some of her colleagues seemed impressed, though they tried to hide it. In conclusion, Sarah said, advancing to her final slide, implementing these logistics optimizations could reduce deployment times by up to 30%, while significantly improving supply chain reliability in challenging environments. The room erupted in polite applause, and Sarah felt her shoulders relax for the first time all day. She had done it. Despite the whispers and judgment, she had delivered a presentation that clearly resonated with the military officials. "Excellent work, Ms. Martinez," said Colonel, the senior Army representative. "Your analysis shows a deep understanding of our operational challenges." Sarah smiled gratefully. "Thank you, sir. I've spent considerable time studying military logistics patterns and efficiency metrics." As the formal Q&A session concluded, the guests began to mingle during the networking break. Sarah was gathering her materials when she felt someone approach her from behind. "Ms. Martinez." She turned to see Commander James Harrison standing there, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Up close, she could see the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years in the field, and the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from all Special Forces personnel. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, straightening her posture instinctively. "That was an outstanding presentation," Commander Harrison said. "Your insights into rapid deployment logistics were particularly impressive. May I ask what inspired your interest in this field?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. This was always the difficult part, explaining her background without revealing too much. "I've always been interested in organizational efficiency, sir. The military represents one of the most complex logistical challenges in the world." Commander Harrison nodded, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was studying her more carefully than a typical networking conversation would warrant. "Your knowledge seems to go beyond academic research. You spoke about field conditions and deployment challenges with unusual specificity." Before Sarah could respond, Richard appeared beside them, his corporate smile plastered across his face. "Commander Harrison, I see you've met one of our analysts," Richard said, his tone suggesting that Sarah was merely one of many employees rather than the person who had just delivered an exceptional presentation. "I hope you found our logistics proposal interesting." "More than interesting," Commander Harrison replied, his eyes still focused on Sarah. "Ms. Martinez has presented some innovative solutions to problems we face regularly in the field." Richard's smile faltered slightly. He clearly hadn't expected such praise for Sarah's work. "Well, yes, our entire team has worked hard on this analysis." "The entire team?" Commander Harrison asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because Ms. Martinez just spent 45 minutes presenting detailed research that appears to be primarily her own work." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to having someone defend her contributions so directly, especially not a high-ranking military official in front of her supervisor. "Of course, Sarah has been a valuable contributor," Richard said, his voice tight. "Though naturally, this represents the collective efforts of our department." Commander Harrison's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And does your entire department have such detailed knowledge of special operations logistics?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Richard clearly didn't know how to respond, having not paid close attention to the technical details of Sarah's presentation. "Well, we all bring different expertise to the table," Richard said weakly. "Indeed," Commander Harrison replied. He turned back to Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, I was wondering if you might have time for a more detailed discussion about some of your proposals. Perhaps we could speak privately." Sarah glanced at Richard, who looked like he wanted to object but didn't dare contradict a Navy SEAL commander in front of other military officials. "Of course, sir," Sarah said. "I'd be happy to discuss the details further." They moved to a quieter corner of the room, away from the crowd of networking executives and officials. Commander Harrison's demeanor seemed to shift slightly, becoming more relaxed but also more focused. "Ms. Martinez, I have to ask, your analysis of rapid deployment scenarios was remarkably detailed. Specifically, your comments about equipment prioritization in hostile environments. That's not typically something you'd learn from textbooks or case studies." Sarah felt her heart begin to race. She had been careful during her presentation, but apparently not careful enough. "I've done extensive research on military operations, sir." "Research," Commander Harrison repeated thoughtfully. "And your understanding of the psychological challenges faced by logistics personnel during extended deployments. That seemed particularly insightful." Sarah's mouth went dry. She had drawn on personal experience for that part of her analysis, but she hadn't realized how obvious it might be to someone with actual military experience. "I try to consider the human element in all my analyses, sir," she said carefully. Commander Harrison studied her face for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped to her left arm, where her cardigan sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing just a glimpse of the tattoo beneath. "That's an interesting piece of artwork," he said quietly. Sarah immediately tugged her sleeve down, her face burning with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, sir. I tried to keep it covered for the presentation." "Why?" Commander Harrison asked, his voice gentle but curious. "Because it's unprofessional," Sarah replied automatically, repeating what she had been told countless times. "It doesn't belong in a corporate environment." Commander Harrison's expression changed then, becoming more serious. "May I see it?" Sarah looked around nervously. They were somewhat isolated from the rest of the group, but she could still see her colleagues and other military officials mingling nearby. "Sir, I don't think that's appropriate. My supervisor specifically asked me to keep it covered." "Your supervisor," Commander Harrison said, his tone suggesting what he thought of Richard's opinion. "Ms. Martinez, I'm not asking as a potential client or as someone making small talk. I'm asking because I think that tattoo might be more significant than your colleagues realize." Something in his voice made Sarah pause. There was a weight to his words that went beyond casual curiosity. "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean," Commander Harrison said, leaning closer and lowering his voice, "that I've been in the military for 22 years and I've seen a lot of tattoos. Most of them are decorative, some are meaningful to the person who has them, and a very few are something more. Something that tells a story that shouldn't be dismissed or hidden." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she looked into his eyes. There was understanding there and something else, recognition. Sir, I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting, Commander Harrison said quietly, that the artwork on your arm might tell a story about service, about sacrifice, about experiences that would explain why your analysis of military logistics is so remarkably accurate. And I'm suggesting that if that's the case, then every person in this room who has dismissed you or asked you to hide that tattoo owes you an apology. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. For 2 years, she had endured the comments, the assumptions, the constant pressure to hide a part of herself that represented something deeply meaningful. And now, for the first time, someone was suggesting that maybe, just maybe, there was more to her story than her colleagues had bothered to discover. Ms. Martinez, Commander Harrison said gently, I'd like to ask you directly, and I hope you'll trust me enough to answer honestly. Have you served in the military? The question hung between them like a bridge that Sarah could either cross or leave unbuilt. She looked around the room one more time, seeing her colleagues laughing and networking, oblivious to the conversation taking place in their corner. She thought about all the nights she had rolled up her sleeves at home, looking at her tattoo and remembering. She thought about the friends whose names were hidden in the intricate design, friends who would never attend another corporate presentation or worry about whether their appearance was professional enough. And she thought about the young woman who had left the military 3 years ago, carrying experiences and knowledge that she had been forced to downplay and hide in her civilian career. Finally, she looked back at Commander Harrison and made a decision that would change everything. Yes, sir, she said quietly, I have. The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt as though she had just stepped off a cliff. For 3 years, she had kept her military service hidden from her civilian colleagues, believing it would only invite more judgment and assumptions about who she was and how she had gotten her job. Commander Harrison's expression shifted immediately. The polite interest of a potential client was replaced by something deeper, the recognition of one service member acknowledging another. What branch? He asked quietly. Army, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Logistics specialist deployed twice to Afghanistan. Commander Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes moving again to her covered arm. And the tattoo. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing the intricate artwork that her colleagues had ridiculed for so long. Commander Harrison's breath caught as he took in the details. The tattoo was far more than decorative body art. It was a memorial, carefully crafted and deeply meaningful. At the center was a pair of worn combat boots with dog tags hanging from the laces. Surrounding them were poppies, the international symbol of remembrance for fallen soldiers. Woven throughout the design were dates, coordinates, and small symbols that would be meaningless to most people, but would be instantly recognizable to anyone who had served in combat. My unit, Sarah said quietly, her finger tracing one of the dates. IED attack outside Kandahar. We lost 3 people that day. Commander Harrison was silent for a long moment, studying the memorial on her arm with the respect it deserved. I'm sorry for your loss, he said finally. How long did you serve? 6 years, Sarah replied. I was a sergeant when I got out. I managed supply chains for forward operating bases, coordinated equipment drops, handled logistics for special operations support. Special operations support, Commander Harrison repeated. That explains your knowledge of rapid deployment protocols. Sarah nodded. I worked with SEAL teams, Army Rangers, Special Forces. I know what it's like when you need critical supplies in hostile territory and you need them fast. And your colleagues have no idea about your background. Sarah shook her head, pulling her sleeve back down. I tried to tell them when I was first hired, but the reactions weren't positive. People either assumed I was making it up for attention, or they had preconceived notions about female veterans. It was easier to just not mention it. Commander Harrison's jaw tightened. So you've been letting them think you're just some tattooed civilian who doesn't belong in their corporate world. It seemed better than dealing with their assumptions about military service, Sarah said. You'd be surprised how many people think female veterans either saw no real action or have PTSD that makes us unreliable employees. Actually, Commander Harrison said grimly, I wouldn't be surprised at all. The transition to civilian life is hard enough without dealing with ignorance and bias. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Around them, the networking event continued, with executives and military officials discussing potential contracts and partnerships. But their quiet corner felt removed from all of that, a space where two veterans could speak honestly about experiences that civilians often couldn't understand. "Ms. Martinez," Commander Harrison said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. When you developed the logistics proposals you presented today, did you draw on your military experience?" Sarah nodded. "Extensively. The efficiency metrics I suggested are based on systems I helped implement in Afghanistan. The rapid deployment protocols come from actual field experience. The equipment prioritization strategies were developed through trial and error in real combat situations." "So essentially," Commander Harrison said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "your colleagues have been dismissing and ridiculing the insights of a decorated veteran who has hands-on experience with the exact challenges they're trying to solve." "I wouldn't say decorated," Sarah protested. "I was just doing my job." "What decorations did you receive?" Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Bronze Star, Army Commendation Medal, Combat Action Badge, and a few others. But really, I was just doing your job," Commander Harrison finished. "A job that earned you a Bronze Star and put you in situations where you learned things that can't be taught in business school or gleaned from textbooks." He looked across the room toward the group of financial executives, his expression cold with disapproval. "And they've been treating you like an unqualified diversity hire." "They don't know any better," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "They don't know any better because they never bothered to ask," Commander Harrison replied. "They saw your tattoo, made their assumptions, and decided you were beneath them. Meanwhile, you've been hiding expertise that could revolutionize military logistics." Sarah felt a mix of validation and anxiety. It was wonderful to have someone finally understand and appreciate her background, but she was also terrified of what might happen next. "Commander, please don't say anything to them," she said quickly. "I've worked hard to build a career here, and I don't want to cause problems." Commander Harrison studied her face. "You don't want to cause problems? Sarah, you've been allowing yourself to be diminished and disrespected for years. You've hidden a Bronze Star-worthy service record because you're afraid of their reactions." "Because their reactions could cost me my job," Sarah replied. "You don't understand the corporate world. Being a veteran doesn't guarantee respect here. Sometimes it makes things worse." "Maybe," Commander Harrison said, "but hiding your expertise isn't protecting you. It's protecting them from having to confront their own prejudices and assumptions." Before Sarah could respond, she noticed that several people were looking in their direction. Richard was approaching with what appeared to be forced casualness, clearly curious about the lengthy conversation between Commander Harrison and one of his analysts. "How's the discussion going?" Richard asked, his smile tight. "I hope Sarah hasn't been taking up too much of your time, Commander." Commander Harrison turned to face Richard, and Sarah was struck by the change in his demeanor. The warmth and understanding he had shown her was replaced by a cold professionalism that somehow managed to be both polite and intimidating. "On the contrary," Commander Harrison said, "Ms. Martinez has been sharing some fascinating insights into logistics optimization. Her knowledge of field operations is quite impressive." "Field operations?" Richard asked, looking confused. "Sarah handles data analysis for us. I'm not sure what field operations experience she would have." Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid. Commander Harrison glanced at her, and she could see the question in his eyes. He was giving her a choice. She could speak up for herself, or she could continue to let her colleagues underestimate her. "Actually," Commander Harrison said when Sarah remained silent, "I was curious about that myself. Ms. Martinez, where exactly did you develop your understanding of military supply chain challenges?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She could feel the weight of the moment, the decision that would either continue her pattern of hiding or force her to finally stand up for herself. She began, then stopped, looking between Commander Harrison's encouraging expression and Richard's impatient confusion. Around them, other conversations were beginning to pause as people noticed the tension in their small group. Sarah realized that other military officials were within earshot, as were several of her colleagues. The moment had arrived when she would have to choose between the safety of invisibility and the risk of finally being seen for who she really was. And in that moment, looking at the memorial tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve and thinking about the friends whose sacrifice it honored. Sarah Martinez made a decision that would change everything. Sarah took a deep breath and slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing her tattoo to the growing group of onlookers. The intricate memorial artwork was now visible to everyone, and she could hear the sharp intake of breath from several colleagues who had never seen the full design up close. I developed my understanding of military supply chain challenges during my 6 years of service in the Army, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I was deployed twice to Afghanistan as a logistics specialist, where I managed supply chains for forward operating bases and coordinated equipment drops for special operations units. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's mouth fell open, and Sarah could see the shock spreading across the faces of her colleagues. Several of the other military officials had stopped their conversations and were now listening intently. This tattoo, Sarah continued, pointing to the memorial on her arm, honors the 3 members of my unit who were killed in an IED attack outside Kandahar. Every detail represents something meaningful: the dates, the coordinates, the symbols. It's not unprofessional body art. It's a memorial to fallen soldiers. Commander Harrison stepped closer to examine the tattoo more carefully, and his expression grew even more serious. These coordinates, he said, pointing to numbers woven into the design. I recognize them. That was the attack on Forward Operating Base Chapman, wasn't it? Sarah nodded, her eyes misting. You know about it. Every Special Operations commander knows about Chapman, Commander Harrison replied grimly. Your unit held that supply line open for 3 days under constant attack, ensuring that wounded soldiers could be evacuated and that Special Forces teams had the equipment they needed to complete their missions. Your actions saved lives. Richard looked between them in confusion. I don't understand. Sarah, you never mentioned any military service during your interview process. Because I learned early that mentioning it often worked against me, Sarah replied, finding her courage. In my first few civilian job interviews, potential employers either didn't believe a young woman could have served in combat roles, or they assumed I had psychological issues that would make me unreliable. It was easier to focus on my analytical skills and education. Colonel, the senior Army representative, approached their group. Excuse me, but did I hear correctly? You served at Chapman. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, automatically straightening her posture. Colonel's entire demeanor changed. Sergeant Martinez, you're the logistics specialist who coordinated the supply drops during the siege. Sarah looked surprised. You know about that, sir? Know about it? Colonel said, his voice filled with respect. Your actions during that operation are part of our case studies at the Command and General Staff College. You managed to maintain supply lines under impossible conditions and adapted protocols in real time to support multiple special operations teams. The crowd around them had grown larger, with both military officials and company employees listening in amazement. Sarah could see her colleagues struggling to reconcile this new information with their previous assumptions about her. I was just doing my job, Sarah said quietly. Your job, Commander Harrison interjected, included being awarded the Bronze Star for Valor Under Fire, didn't it? Sarah nodded reluctantly, among other commendations. Richard looked like he had been struck by lightning. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? This changes everything. Your military experience is exactly what our clients are looking for. Is it? Sarah asked, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Because for 2 years, you've made it clear that my tattoo was unprofessional and embarrassing. You've suggested that I was hired through a diversity program rather than merit. You've asked me to hide who I am because it might offend clients. The accusation hung in the air, and Richard's face flushed red. Several other executives looked uncomfortable as they realized their own complicity in Sarah's treatment. Now you're telling me that my experience is valuable, Sarah continued, but only because you've learned it's more extensive than you assumed. What about tomorrow when the excitement dies down? Will you still think my memorial tattoo belongs in your corporate boardroom? Commander Harrison watched this exchange with interest, clearly seeing the broader implications of what was happening. Ms. Martinez raises an important point, he said, addressing Richard directly. How many other qualified veterans might you be overlooking because they don't fit your narrow definition of professional appearance? Admiral Wells, the Navy representative who had been quietly listening, stepped forward. Mister, I'd like to understand something. If Ms. Martinez's military experience and expertise are as extensive as they appear to be, why hasn't she been leading your military consulting division? Richard stammered, clearly struggling to find an answer that wouldn't make him look worse. Well, that is, the division head position requires. Requires what? Admiral Wells asked coolly. More education, more experience, better analytical skills, because from what I've heard today, Ms. Martinez seems to possess all of those qualities. Sarah watched this confrontation with mixed emotions. Part of her was thrilled to finally have her expertise recognized and valued, but another part of her was worried about the long-term consequences of this very public revelation. David, her supportive colleague, pushed through the crowd. Sarah, I had no idea about your military background. Your insights into logistics always seemed so practical and experienced. Now I understand why. A lot of things make sense now, added Maria from the research department. Your presentations always had this authenticity that the rest of us couldn't match. But not all reactions were positive. Sarah could see Jennifer from accounting whispering urgently to Mark from sales, both of them looking skeptical and resentful. Commander Harrison noticed the mixed reactions as well. Ladies he said, addressing the entire group, I think there's an important lesson here about making assumptions. Ms. Martinez has been hiding remarkable qualifications because she felt they wouldn't be valued or respected in this environment. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. The military's loss has been your gain, but only if you choose to recognize and utilize her expertise properly. Admiral Wells nodded in agreement. We'll be recommending that all future contracts with financial be handled directly through Ms. Martinez, given her unique qualifications and experience. Richard's eyes widened. That would be a significant responsibility. A responsibility she's clearly qualified for, Colonel added. Her combat experience and practical knowledge far exceed what we typically see from civilian consultants. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. In the span of 30 minutes, she had gone from hiding her background to being publicly recognized as the most qualified military consultant in the company. There's one more thing, Commander Harrison said, his voice becoming more serious. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to formally thank you for your service and sacrifice. What you and your unit did at Chapman mattered. It saved lives and enabled mission success. He turned to address the crowd. This woman is a decorated veteran who has served her country with distinction. The fact that she felt the need to hide that service says more about our civilian culture's failure to recognize and respect veterans than it does about her. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen and valued for who she was, rather than judged for how she looked. Thank you, she whispered to Commander Harrison. He smiled and extended his hand for a firm handshake. Thank you, Sergeant Martinez, for your service, for your sacrifice, and for reminding all of us that true professionalism isn't about appearance, it's about competence, integrity, and dedication. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by military officials and colleagues wanting to learn more about her experience and expertise. Richard approached hesitantly, clearly realizing that his treatment of her would need to change dramatically. Sarah, he said quietly, I owe you an apology, and we need to discuss your role in the company moving forward. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then at her tattoo, now visible to everyone. She thought about the friends whose memory it honored and the experiences that had shaped her expertise. Yes, she said finally, we do need to discuss that. And mister, I won't be hiding my tattoo anymore. It's part of who I am, and who I am is exactly what this company needs. For the first time in years, Sarah Martinez stood in a corporate setting as her full, authentic self, a decorated veteran, a skilled analyst, and a woman who refused to be diminished by others' assumptions. The woman they had ridiculed for her ink had finally shown them exactly what that ink represented, and nothing would ever be the same.